Welcome to part 2 of the series on building a chat room. As we worked on the HTML CSS mockup in part 1, I realized that I may be spending too much time on the static HTML CSS when the goal of this tutorial is not that, right? So just to save us a little bit of time, I finished that mockup and this is what it looks like now. So we still have our index.html and it's all static, but now you can see the styling is complete and let's just refresh this, make sure it's right. Yeah. And then I have the online users. Again, everything is static right now. And then the chat window looks nice. It has a decent height and I can type my chat here. So that takes care of my HTML CSS. Again, it's primarily Bootstrap, but I added our main.css to add some custom styling. So everything will be on GitHub, of course, for you to look at. So I'm not going to go through this HTML CSS itself, but this is what it looks like now. Okay, so in this tutorial, we're going to go through the process of adding JavaScript so that we can do some dynamic stuff. So again, before we get into the actual chat application, let's put some JavaScript building blocks in this tutorial so that we're ready for the actual chat part, which will be done in sockets or something called WebSockets. Okay, so I'm actually going to use node.js to run our server. And if you're not familiar, again, if you go to node.js.org, it is basically a JavaScript runtime. It allows you to do a bunch of things, but primarily people use it on the server side for, you could build like web applications and use Node.js as a server. You could use it for other things. It's not just for web applications. but in our case, obviously we're going to use it for the web application, and it's very simple to get started. You need to download the latest version. In my case, I have a Mac. If you are using PC, whatever, there are ways to, of course, install it for all different platforms. So you need to install Node, and then there's something called npm, which is really a package manager. Welcome to part 3 of building a chat room. Continuing from part 2, we were looking at the connected users list. So sorry, the last video stopped right here. So basically we removed the hard coding in the list item, and we just we're going to print all the connected users from this array of connected users. So let's take a look at that. So now in my browser, yes, I can see that. I can see user A and B that are not hard coded in my HTML, and they're coming from my JavaScript. Of course, they're still hard coded in the JavaScript itself, which we will get rid of very shortly. Alright, so finally in this video, we will walk through the steps of setting up the chat functionality. Woohoo, we're there. Okay, sorry it took 2 videos, but I think I'm also getting better, hopefully, as we go along. So, what do we need to do to add the chat function? Because obviously right now this is still pretty static. There is no functionality. You know, the chat message, if I type something, it's not going to happen. Nothing's going to be sent. So what we need to do, we need to use something called WebSockets. All right, so before we get into the actual coding, I do want to go through some of the concepts of WebSockets so that it makes it easy to understand when I do it in terms of code. Okay, so I have a little picture here that I want to describe. Basically, in a regular client-server architecture where you have a server and then multiple clients are connecting to it, clients can be your browser, your smartphone, whatever, right? In a regular, what we call request response or HTTP protocol, right? When you have HTTP or HTTPS, you send a request from client to the server, and if the server finds something, it returns it back in a response. Same thing, it could be multiple clients connected. They could all be sending a request, and server is going to respond to each of them as it gets a request. So this is the regular HTTP model, right, or protocol. But notice that this is, this model doesn't really work for real-time stuff, which means that, first of all, these clients don't have any way of knowing what each of them are doing, right? So if I, for example, in the chat example, if this client sends a request or a message to the server doesn't know that it needs to send it to all other clients, right? It doesn't know in the regular HTTP model, because until this second client sends a request itself, the server is not going to send anything back to them. So it's almost like, you send me something and I'm going to send it, you request something, then only I will send it back only to you, not to anybody else. So that works fine for a regular website, web application, but when it comes to real-time stuff like chat or notifications, it doesn't really work, right? Because as you can see, it's just not possible then for other clients to know what this client sent, right? Unless they also know something about it, they send a request themselves, kind of gets messy. Imagine right now in my picture, I only have 3 clients. You could have hundreds and thousands of clients connected to the server. One of the techniques that people came up with, before WebSockets were, put in place, was something called polling, and also something called long polling. Essentially, what it means is that you kind of hacked your way into it. So you said, okay, I know that the server will only send me a response when I send a request, but maybe I'm going to do that in a way that I'm going to keep requesting the server at a certain time interval. And if the server finds it, it's going to send it back to me. So think about that. That kind of puts a lot of load on the performance, and it's not ideal solution. So it was kind of like a hack, right? In fact, that's the fallback methodology for WebSockets in general, that you do long polling or even worse, polling. So anyway, so for real-time stuff, as you know, this is 2017 when I'm making this video, a lot of things are going real-time. Of course, chat is the most simple example. You could have multiplayer games and streaming and lots of other things, right? So For that purpose, WebSockets were invented. So WebSockets are nothing but a protocol. So that's very important to know in terms of the concept. It's not a HTTP. It's just like an HTTP, HTTPS, as in that it's a protocol. So you have HTTP protocol. You have other types of protocol like FTP, right, for files. Same thing for WebSockets. You have a protocol WS, WebSocket, or WSS for the secure, encrypted connection. But we're not going to get into too much of that. I just wanted to show you the concept. So if you look at the picture for WebSocket, this is what it's going to look like. It just looks much simpler compared to the HTTP model that I showed you earlier, right? Obviously, I've simplified things a bit, but the idea is that notice that the arrow is, not unidirectional, which means it doesn't only go one way. One arrow goes both ways. It's bidirectional. And that's the concept of a socket that you basically, it's sort of like a connection between the client and the server, and it's always on until the client disconnects, and then you have bidirectional communication. Now this is really cool because now what you could do, basically you're saying that anything that I send to the server is now going to be able to emit or broadcast. And again, these are specific terms, but the bottom line is now the server has the capacity to send that, let's say, an event. So let's say the chat is an event. So if client 1 sends a chat to the server, because of the socket connections that are on, the server can send it or broadcast it to every other client that's connected to it, all in real time. So that's what these WebSockets do for you. This second client doesn't have to request what chat was sent. As long as they're listening on the socket, they're connected, the server would be able to send that to you. So you don't have to ask the server specifically, hey, is there a new chat? Hey, is there a new chat? No, you don't want to do that, right? One client sends a chat, all the other clients get it. Of course, they need to be listening for it, and I will show you that in the code, but bottom line is you don't have to ask explicitly every time. Otherwise, imagine the performance and other things, and it's just not scalable. So that's what WebSockets do for you in a very simplified form that I wanted to show you. Sorry for the sloppy diagram, but this is the best I came up with. By the way, it's a really nice tool called draw.io if you want to use that for any quick prototyping. This is a very nice tool. It even lets you save to your Google Drive and other things. So anyway, all right, so let's, this kind of gives you an overview of what WebSockets do compared to the regular HTTP model. All right, so time to get into the code again. Okay, so WebSockets is, the concept, the protocol is what we just discussed. Now we need to implement WebSockets in our code. To implement WebSockets, there are a lot of libraries out there because, again, it takes care of the abstraction for you, so you don't have to write all the boilerplate code. So if I had to use an analogy, I would say plain JavaScript versus jQuery, for example. jQuery takes care of lots of abstractions for you, so you don't really have to use plain JavaScript for everything, right? jQuery makes your life easy to, say, manipulate the DOM and things like that. So same thing with WebSockets. There's a lot of implementations of WebSockets, and one of the implementation is called socket.io, which is what we're going to use in this tutorial. So you can go to socket.io, the website. One thing I will mention, don't be concerned, some of their documentation on the website is a little outdated. We've some GitHub issues raised on that. I don't know why they haven't fixed the website. A couple of pages here, but the library is solid. It works really well. So anyway, just keep that in mind. For example, their Slack, this link is broken for some reason. That's not the right Slack link. So we have raised issues. Even I have personally raised an issue on GitHub. They just haven't, for some reason, haven't fixed it yet. But anyway, so socket.io is a sort of a wrapper or library that implements WebSockets for you. So they have some good demos to see and their documentation. Like I said, some things might not be correct, as in the links are broken a couple of places, but overall it's still pretty good. Anyway, So what socket.io does, it provides you two implementations. Again, one on the client side and one on the server side. And what does that mean? So WebSockets, for them to work, remember the client connects to the server, right? And it's a bi-directional communication. So you need to be able to have an implementation on the client side. And also WebSockets, they don't work by themselves like magically on the server side. You need to implement WebSocket, something called a WebSocket server. So Socket.io provides you that as well. So not only provides you the client side, abstraction or a library, it also provides you the server side implementation in node.js. And that's the reason I'm using Node, is also because there's already a node.js implementation of Socket.io. Socket.io has something for Node already. So that's the cool part. All right, so how do we do that? So remember, client side and server side, we need both implementations for WebSockets. So if you do this by yourself and not use Socket.io, remember you will have to implement the client-side logic and the server-side logic if you just go like plain, without any libraries. But on the server side, you will have to write your own WebSocket server. So there's a couple of other good implementations out there for the server, but a lot of these implementations don't provide anything for the client. And that's what Socket.io does. It gives you both, so it makes your life easy. And also it has Socket.io takes care of, like saying if a browser doesn't support WebSocket for any reason, even though these days almost all modern browsers do support it, then it will fall back to that polling or long polling method that we talked about earlier. So then you're safe. It's not like, oh, it's not going to work because there's no WebSocket protocol supported by this browser. All right, so so enough about Socket.io theory. Well, let's get into some of the code now. So I'm going to go back to my VS Code. And remember that we already have a setup done, right? On the server side, we have the node running, which is the code here. And then we have the client side JavaScript, in vue.js sort of ready. So what we need to do, we need to install a package. So remember, we already have the package.json ready as well. So now for socket.io, we need another JavaScript package for the server side, which is called socket.io, right? So let's do that. So we need to install that. So go back into our terminal and maybe just exit out of the existing server and make sure I'm in the right directory again. So I'm going to do npm install, just the same way we did the express package earlier, socket.io -- save. So it's going to install, and again, no errors, same usual warning. So we should be good. If I go back to my package.json file, yep, socket.io is implemented, or sorry, is pulled in as a dependency in my node modules. So notice the version by default it pulls in, which is the latest released version, which is 1.7.2 as of January 2017. One quick thing on their website, again, which is a slight issue, they haven't updated this, so it still says download version 1.4.5, but don't use that. Just make sure you do npm install for the latest version. Okay, so we got the server-side Socket.io done, right? We got the server-side library installed. So, but we need the client side as well. So for the client side, in testing, the server side module provides you, that boilerplate already. So you don't really need to add a client side for testing purposes, but in production you will need something. You'll need a real time. So I don't want to do the testing. I'm just going to use the actual client side library. So for that, we're going to pull in the CDN for the client side. And I'm just going to copy it. And in my index for now, let's just add that. So you could add it before view or after view, it doesn't really matter. Let me just do it before view. I'm going to add that here. Okay. So this is the client side implementation of Socket Io. This is not the server side. Server side we already did under Node. Okay, so remember that. This is very important. There is a client side Node package as well. For some reason, when I did this tutorial, I didn't use that, so I'm just using the CDN. Okay. All right, so save that. And all right, so we got that. All right, so we indent the code. So now we have added the server side and the client side libraries, so we can use it. So what do? We're gonna have to go back onto our Node side, the server side JavaScript code, which was this, right? And then let's add initialize Socket Io now. So what we need to do, we need to say var and give it any variable name. I'm just gonna call it IO rather than Socket Io. Equals to, again, we're gonna require package. In this case, it's gonna be socket.io, which we installed through the npm. And you pass it along, you call it with the server, which was defined earlier. So that's all you need to do to initialize your socket IO. Initialize your socket IO connection on the server side. Pretty cool, right? Just one line and you have socket IO initialized. Okay, so what do we do with it? One thing we do is we're gonna say IO dot on. So just bear with me, I'm gonna explain everything. Connection, and we're gonna pass in a function, and we're gonna pass in the socket. So what this means, it says when a client connects to the server, to the socket server, right? So this connection is like sort of like a special keyword that you can use, and there are other events that custom events that you will define, for example, sending a chat. So this is like an event. So when the socket has the event of connection, which is already predefined, which means someone connected, like a client connected to the server, essentially meaning that I opened, my localhost and I hit enter, so I opened a connection. Then do something with that specific socket. Remember, every connection creates its own socket, right? It has its own socket, which means it has its own properties, maybe an ID that, again, Socket IO kind of creates for you. So think of socket as a specific user or a specific, connection, really. So when a specific user connects, what do we do? To the server, remember, this is a server-side code. So when a user connects to the code, what do we do? So of course, I'm just gonna start with a test. So I'm just gonna do console.log, and we're gonna say a user connected, okay? and then I'm going to print their socket information. So I'm going to do socket.id. So again, socket.id is the ID of that specific socket that connected. And this is provided by Socket Io library, of course. So by default, it's not like the WebSocket ID is available. This is because of the library we're using, it provides you a nice implementation of IDs. See, it says unique ID for that socket. So that's essentially your user ID in this case, from our perspective, because we're assuming that one user will connect from one client, right? Which is true. Okay, so let's see what that does. So I don't have anything on the client side yet. I'm just running a server. So let's go back here to my terminal and let's do the same thing. Node index.js. And you know what? I'm going to close this tab, or just exit out. Maybe just hit Google. So I don't have that opened. So now if I hit node index, I'm doing listening on. So notice that it's not doing anything yet, right, on the console. Let me just do this maybe at the bottom. No, let's just leave it there. I do struggle with this sometimes, the windows and the tiling. Anyway, so I'm now gonna hit, oops, that's gone, but we're gonna get that back. So if I hit localhost 3000 again, I connected, right? So I should see something on my console. Okay, and it didn't show me anything. So looks like we have to do something. Okay, what do we do here? Did we miss something? Let's take a look in the inspect element if we're getting any errors. Nope, nothing. I'm thinking now that maybe we need to add something on the client side so that it actually tells us something. So we do need some client side code probably, so I was wrong. And remember, I'm also learning this stuff as we go along, so I may mess up at times here and there. Okay, so what we need to do, we need to say, so like I said, I was an idiot and I did not add any client-side code for the socket. You of course need to do at least initialize the socket on the client side as well, otherwise server doesn't know anything about it. So the actual connection only happens when you also initialize on the client side. So my bad. But anyway, so on the client side JavaScript, all we need to do is we need to just initialize the socket. So in this case, I'm going to call it var socket equals IO. And that's all you need to do for now, just to test what I was trying to test. So I'm going to save this. And now if I run node index.js, I should be able to see listening on. So if I connect this time, so I connected, and go back and see, yep, it showed in the console, a user connected. And notice this kind of like string, TF, Z, whatever, like a long unique string. So this is the idea of the server. Okay, so what we need to do, we need to say, so like I said, I was an idiot and I did not add any client-side code for the socket. you of course need to do at least initialize the socket on the client side as well. Otherwise, server doesn't know anything about it. So the actual connection only happens when you also initialize on the client side. So my bad. But anyway, so on the client side JavaScript, all we need to do is we need to just initialize the socket. So in this case, I'm going to call it var socket equals IO. And that's all you need to do for now, just to test what I was trying to test. So I'm going to save this. And now if I run node index.js, I should be able to see listening on. So if I connect this time, so I connected, and go back and see, yep, it showed in the console, a user connected. And notice this kind of like string, TF, Z, whatever, like a long unique string. So this is the ID of the socket. That has been assigned to it. And that's the beauty, that now you can uniquely identify each socket. So I could say user connected. Now, what if I disconnected, right? So same thing. If I again, well, let's test another connection first. So if I connect again, like in a second tab, it's going to show another connection. And see the connection, the socket ID is different. So in this case, it's this, and in the second case, it's this. So now we know there are two users that are connected with these two socket IDs. And the beauty is that as long as they're connected, the server is aware of it. Okay. So let's do this. We're going to now check the disconnect. So same thing. We may have to turn the server off and just add some code here. So let me just do that. Okay, so do that, and then let's close the server. And now, same thing, when a client disconnects, we could do what happens? So inside this, right, io.on connection, all the other stuff just pretty much goes inside this code block. That's how you do it on the server side. So I don't have to create another io.on disconnect in this case. Everything goes inside this. So it's kind of like the life cycle of each connection. So that's how we're tracking that socket. So inside the same io.on connection function, now I'm going to say what happens if that socket disconnects. So I'm going to say, so now I'm going to use socket, which is that individual socket.on. And again, there's an event called disconnect. What do we do? So again, just wrap this in a function. And for now, let's just say console.log, okay, user left. And then again, we're going to print the socket ID. So you can see what that does. All right, so all we're saying is that socket.on disconnect, user left. Okay. So save this and let's rerun our code. The node server. And notice that it shows me two connected already, because again, that's the beauty of sockets. I already had two connections, right, from my previous, and ignore the errors because when I closed the server, these errors came through. Let me just clear this. So I already have two tabs, and it again reassigned them two IDs, and these are actually different from the last time. So that ID is of course, assigned when a client connects, and it may not be the same as the last time just because you use the same browser. So anyway, so that's how it works. So now we have two connected users or clients. So if I close one, this should update. So let's say, I don't know, the first one is probably the TRD, the second one is 2SS. So let's just close this guy. If I closed one connection, it says, "Whoa, user left." So TRD was the one we closed, really. And that's how it works. So the server knows when someone is connecting, the server knows when someone is not connecting. All right, great. So, so we have successfully done the connection and disconnect. Now we're going to add some more fun stuff. Okay, let's go back to our code, and now let's do some coding on getting the connected users. So the online users. Remember, this is still a hard-coded list, right? So let's work on that now. Because what we're going to do, we're going to show that individual socket ID as the user ID here. Just so that, because I'm not really using any backend right now for, you know, user login or authentication and all that stuff. I'm just going to use the sockets to show here. And that's the beauty of this tutorial, that I'm not going to go into the backend necessarily, like, you know, a traditional database with the user IDs and things like that, at least for now. We might get there, you know, once we finish the tutorial. We may do that at the very end to kind of complete this, but for now, I'm just going to use the socket IDs as the user IDs here. So to do that, we need to use the connected users. So remember, obviously, the connected users I initialized with some garbage data here. So let's just, you know, so let's just keep that as blank. So then when you initially connect, we're not going to show any connected users, right? Or when this view instance initializes, of course, there's nothing. It doesn't know anything. So we need to add to this array every time a client connects, right? So for that, remember we had a created function, right? So what we need to do we need to say every time a user is joining, right? You know, we need to do something. So first thing, actually, let's go back. I apologize, I kind of mixed up here. We go back to our index.js on the server side, and we need to remember we did this, right? io.on connection and a user connected. So every time someone connects to the server, it's the server's job to tell every other client that someone has connected, right? So it's not the client's job, right? That, hey, I'm connecting, who else is connected? No, they just tell the server catches this io.on connection, okay, someone has connected. So obviously right now, all I did was console.log, but that's not enough, right? We need to now tell all the other clients that are connected to this server in real time. So in order to do that, we're going to say tell all clients that someone connected, okay? So to do that, we need to use something called emit. So, and you may hear this term emit or broadcast. Technically, there's a difference. Emit usually sends it to every client, including the one that connected. Broadcast will send it to every other client except the one that connected. So just to keep things simple, I'm just going to use emit, so everybody sees everything. So to do that, you're going to do io.emit. And I know you have to get used to this, when to use the IO, when to use the socket, but remember the IO is the overall connection, the server, socket is the individual socket. So obviously in this case, you're going to do io.emit because the overall, the server has to emit to everybody else. So now I can pretty much send any custom name that I want to send. Say it says event that we want to emit, which means that I could type anything here. I could type A, I could type B, whatever. So of course, let's type something that makes sense. So we're going to say user joined. And again, it can be a string. Usually, I don't get too creative with this string. Just keep it simple. I'm just going to say user joined. So if that happens, you're going to pass some data. That's the next parameter in this emit function. So I'm going to pass the sockets.id of the socket that connected. So this is a really powerful statement, line, piece of code. See, it says emit an event to the default namespace, but we're getting into the namespace later. But for now, just say it's going to tell every client that someone has connected. And then it's passing on that specific ID of the client, that connected at the time. Okay, so now all the clients should be able to get this event. And to do that, the client has to listen for it. Of course, the client wouldn't know by default, right? Because how do I know what event to catch if I don't know the name or the text, the string of the event? So of course, when you're programming this, you also need to catch this on the client side. So the server sent it, that's great, but we need to catch it on the client side. Okay, and this is the beauty of sockets, or socket.io in this case, is that whatever event, again, this is an event, user joined, exact same string or event needs to be used on the client side to ensure that you're catching it correctly. So if I have sent an emit of user joined on my client side, I also need to catch user joined somewhere. And how do I do that? So on the client side, we're going to put that in the created function of the Vue instance. Remember, we had a Vue created function, which is really where you put all the code of what happens when it's ready. So now I'm going to say if, and I'm going to be documenting this, so commenting these so that it makes sense to if you look at it later. If server emits user join, remember that's the event we sent from the server, then what we're going to do, we need to update the connected users array. Remember, we have an array that we initialize, right, in our JavaScript. That's all we need to do. So to do that, we're going to do socket. Remember that's the variable we have on the client side, right? So socket dot on, again the on function, but this time we're going to be catching the same event, user joined, and we're going to say function, and we know that the socket ID was sent to us, right, by the server. Remember, in that emit here, right? So then we know that's the data that's being passed over to us. So that's what we catch here. And I'm just going to say when this happens, we need to push. So we're going to do var, and we're going to do well, for now, let's just say this dot connected users. So we need to use this, keyword reference, dot connected users. So my array dot push, and we're going to do socket ID, right? That's all I need to do here. It's a very simple piece of code. So again, let's look at that. When we receive a user joined event from the server, we're going to update our connected users.push. Great. So let's do that. And now in the HTML, remember we already have that connected users part done, which is the cool part. We don't need to change anything here. So this should update. All right, so let's just redo the server, restart the server. And well, it looks like I already have one tab open. Yeah, so it says user connected, right? So let's see what that looks like. Let's refresh the page though, just to make sure. And I didn't see anything here. Okay. Let's see if we have any errors. We do have errors. It says cannot read property push off undefined. Aha. What it's saying is that in your Vue instance, it doesn't really know that connected users is not defined, even though you see it here, right? So what's happening? This is a JavaScript thing. What has happened is that I need to do something here, which is called using the bind keyword, bind function. The reason is because this socket.on had its own scope. So inside this block of socket.on function, this function block, connected users doesn't exist. It doesn't know. This is one of those JavaScript things in the ES5 model of JavaScript, like the ECMA, script 5, not the 6, or also the ECMA 2015, which is same as ECMA 6, ES6, which takes care of this by using arrow functions and things like that. So again, in this tutorial, that's not my goal. I'm using the ES5 syntax. So we need to do a bind. So we're going to do dot bind this. So we're saying, okay, whatever is available in here in my view instance, bind that for this block. So that should take care of the issue. Well, let's try that. Let's refresh the page. Waha, look at this. Beautiful. Aren't you proud, right, when this works? Okay, so this is the actual socket ID. So let's look at one thing here, again, just to explain the concept, what's really happening in the backend. If I look at my network, notice that there's this thing called type WebSocket. So this is a WebSocket connection that has happened. If I click on that, connected users is not defined, even though you see it here, right? So, and we're gonna do socket ID, right? That's all I need to do here. I didn't see anything here. This function block, yes, beautiful, own scope. So inside this block of socket.on function, this function block, connected users doesn't exist. It doesn't know. This is one of those JavaScript things in the ES5 model of JavaScript, like the ECMA, script 5, not the 6, or also the ECMA 2015, which is same as ECMA 6, ES6, which takes care of this by using arrow functions and things like that. So again, in this tutorial, that's not my goal. I'm using the ES5 syntax. So we need to do a bind. So we're going to do dot bind this. So we're saying, okay, whatever is available in here in my view instance, bind that for this block. So that should take care of the issue. Well, let's try that. Let's refresh the page. This is one of those JavaScript things in the ES5 model of JavaScript, like the ECMA, script 5, not the 6, or also the ECMA 2015, which is same as ECMA 6, ES6, which takes care of this by using arrow functions and things like that. So again, in this tutorial, that's not my goal. I'm using the ES5 syntax. So we need to do a bind. So we're going to do dot bind this. So we're saying, okay, whatever is available in here in my view instance, bind that for this block. So that should take care of the issue. Well, let's try that. Let's refresh the page. Waha, look at this. Beautiful. Aren't you proud, right, when this works? Okay, so this is the actual socket ID. So let's look at one thing here, again, just to explain the concept, what's really happening in the backend. If I look at my network, notice that there's this thing called type WebSocket. So this is a WebSocket connection that has happened. If I click on it, You see this request URL, it starts with a WS instead of like I say an HTTP, right? So that's what I was talking about earlier when we look at the diagram. This is the WebSocket protocol, and it's connecting using this overall URL. And notice that some of this stuff is actually created by the Socket Io library, and it just says ID equals to the same ID here, this KV whatever, right? So I'm showing that here. And notice the online users is also correct. It's 1. Great. All right, so let's test this. So let's create another connection to my server. All right, notice that I can now see my new ID in here, but we have a problem. On the other tab, it works. I see both because I already have this tab open, but on this tab, I only see my own user ID. I don't see the other guy. I don't see this KV guy connected, because ideally in the chat room, when I connect, I should see all the other online users as well. So what happened here? Well, we didn't do the implementation, 100% yet. We're missing something. And let's think about what we're missing. So first tab, it looks great. The second client connected, I can see it. I have 2 users. But on my new tab, I only see myself. I don't see the previous guy. Why? Well, because if you look back into your code, what am I doing here on my client side? I'm just saying when a user joined event comes, right, just push this connected users to the socket ID to the connected users array. So when I do the second tab, when everything initialized, my connected users array is blank, right? When my Vue instance loaded on this particular tab. Okay, so it starts with blank. And then I said, okay, my servers told me that I have joined. So just add myself to that connected users list, which is what it did here. So according to the code, it's working correct. Of course, on the first tab, because the connected users already had 1 item added, the second time it added it again. So remember, these are each tab at its own Vue instance, right? The JavaScript on the client side. So that's not enough. We need to actually, every time when we connect, we also need to check who else is already connected and then update that connected users array accordingly, right? Otherwise, it's going to work on the first tab, it's not going to work on the second tab, at least in this case, as an example. So, and that's obviously is not right. So what do? We need to somehow ask the server every time I'm connecting a new client connected, and the server sent me that, event. But I, on the client side, I'm starting from scratch, right? Every time I'm connecting, like as a new client, I'm starting from scratch. I don't know anything about who else is connected right now. I don't know anything about it. So I need to get that list of who is connected already. And to do that, I need to send a request to the server, because obviously I can't ask other clients. There's no way for me to do that, right? So I need to ask the server to get a list of all the online users. Okay, how do we do that? Well, let's write some code on the server side first to send that list. Okay, so we go back to our index.js. Remember, we have the app.get for the home page. Same thing again, a request will be sent to the server, so server needs to catch that request. So I'm going to say if I receive a request on the server side, I don't know, just call it online users. So I'm going to say, this request is coming, and it's going to be an Ajax request. And I'll show you how to do that on the client side. But for now, let's just send the data. So we're going to have a request, response, the same thing, right? And this is all possible through Express.js that we did install, of course. So if I get a request for online users, a GET request, we need to send something, right? We need to send a response. What do we send? We need to send all the connected sockets or all the online users, right? Now, you would think, hey, to do that, we need to store this information in the database. Otherwise, how do we store on the server side? How do we know who's connected? No database necessary. That's the beauty of Socket.io or or WebSockets in general. Socket.io provides you a really nice, simple information about who is connected. And this took me a while to research. Again, their documentation was a little bit difficult, but this is what I found. you need to send, so I'm going to do response.send IO that I already know is initialized, right? Dot sockets, so this is like a list of sockets, and then we need to do something called adapter dot rooms. And I know this is a lot to process, but essentially this is what you need to send. So let me show you this, and this is the latest version. I don't know, socket.io is also known to make some changes, backward incompatible changes. So if you're using a very old version, be careful, make sure you're using the latest version, the one I'm using in this tutorial. So console log, and let's just log that sockets dot, same thing, adapter dot rooms, right? So let's log that just to see, and then we're going to send that as a response. Okay. So that's the server-side code to get all the online users. And this is the magical piece of code that you need to do. This, has everyone connected. So just to test, let's just say I put the same thing in here. You know what? Let's just put this also here. For now, because we don't have the online users Ajax request done on the client side, let's just do bam. Well, let's do it after. No, we gotta do it before, I think. Yeah. So let's just kill this, and notice the console is logging everything that we're doing so far. So node.js, whoops, node index.js. Okay, so listening on that, and now we have a user connected. We have 2 users connected, right? I'm just gonna refresh this, both of these pages. So obviously it's still the same issue. I don't see the updated list on every tab, but because we haven't implemented that. But now notice that I'm going to go here, and well, let's refresh because we haven't done that. Let's refresh it. Let's refresh here. Okay, I don't see that. I was hoping to see more stuff on the console. Let's see. And notice that every time I refresh the tab, it also does a disconnect first and then it reconnects. So this is also important to know. If you refresh your tab, the socket connection refreshes. So just be aware of that. It's not only when you quit the tab or close the browser. Also when you refresh, it does that. Okay. Let's see here. Well, maybe it's not really working because I have a response that needs to be sent. So I'm not sure why this is not working. We may have to test this. But let's see. Well, let me just try one more time. Did I miss something here? Let's just close one tab. Yeah, that console log is not working here. Okay, fine. We're gonna take this out of here. We're just gonna keep it here. Okay, so I'll still show you what this looks like, of course, because I know it works here. I've done this before. Let me come back to that later. Okay, so online user, so we need to implement the Ajax request on the client side. So let's do that. So in vue.js, there is no direct way of doing an Ajax request. So it's kind of one of those things, right? It's a library for specific things. So what we do, for Vue, there's a really nice library called Axios. So we're going to use that, and it allows you to send Ajax requests. So I'm going to copy my CDN for that, and I'm going to add it maybe right after I initialize my view. So again, Axios, Axios. You can Google it and learn all about it. It's pretty simple HTTP, like an Ajax library. So now I can do something like this in my client side JS file. I need to go back to that code where I'm doing when user joins. So before pushing to the connector users is great, the current socket, but I also need to send a get already connected users first, right? And that's where we're going to use the Axios library. So we need to do Axios.get. It's an Ajax request, same URL, the online users that we did. And then it says dot then, maybe indent this a little bit, dot then, right? So we're going to do something, and that's going to be a function which takes the response that is sent by the server. Okay. And then we're going to do something there. And remember, again, because we're doing an Axios.get, again, this is a code block by itself, a function. We need to kind of do the same thing, the binding. So make sure we don't forget that. So let's do that, dot find this. Okay. So we close the then. Yep. Okay. So we've done the bind this. And now we can check the response that we got. So we can now, so we're going to expect the response the way when you send a response from the server side, it has a data attribute property that comes through. That's how it's implemented in the in Express or Node side. So we're gonna do, so we know it's response.data. So we're gonna loop through it because we're expecting an array, a list. So we're gonna do for var key, it's a key value pair in response.data. And now inside the for loop, we're going to check, we're going to compare if this dot connected users dot index of this key, the key is really the user ID or the socket ID. If this key is less than equal to -1, which really means that I don't want to add it to my connected users array if it's already there, yeah, because that could happen. So I want to duplicate it. Then do this push here that we did, right? So let's cut this from here and put this piece of code, in here. And now, of course, we're gonna do key, because that's what we're gonna, the key is really the socket ID. So I'll show you what this looks in the console. I know there's a lot of things to process, but I realize I've been 49 minutes into this, so I want to make sure I kind of move fast. I don't want this video to be too long. Okay, So we do that. So now we've connected, and maybe I'm just going to do a console log on the browser, on my client side, just to check that. So let's just do that. So now that this dot connected user users list should update. All right, so let's test this. So because we haven't really changed anything on the server side, I'm not going to restart the server. Let's just reload this page here. Error. So we say request failed. So it can't find online users. Okay, why did that happen? So it's not able to find, it's a 404 not found. Oh, did I actually change something here? Online users. Oh, I forgot. This is like probably a stupid mistake. I don't know if this matters. But we're going to say slash. Let's see if that makes any difference. Yeah, that didn't really change anything. Okay. Okay, let's you know what? Let's try to maybe restart the server, because maybe that new URL needs to be captured after restarting the server. So let's just do that. All right, we do that. Let's reload. And still didn't work. All right, guys, you know what? I'm gonna fix this issue and then come back. Sorry. Let me just pause the video here. Okay, guys, I'm back. Sorry about that. So basically that 404 was coming because of a stupid issue here. I missed a slash here on the server side. So make sure you add the slash in the front. For some reason, otherwise it was giving me a 404. Anyway, so now if I just go and reload just to show you, voila, we connect, and at the bottom I can see my console that I see I'm logging that socket information, the ID here. So that's the same here. Okay, so let's try to open a new tab. All right, beautiful, right? Not only that, I saw my own ID here, I can see the previous ID as well. And this is a new tab. And if I go back to the old tab, yep, the second guy is here too. So we have successfully implemented who is online functionality. Well, at least the joining part. I know we need to finish the disconnecting part so that this list updates. So we'll do that next. But you can see here in the console logging. So now we have the array of two values in there. This is the connected users array, right? So pretty cool. And if you look at my the server side logging console, remember I was trying to do that adapter rooms console logging. So this is what it does here. You can see that by default it stores everything key value pair with room sockets. So that's how you're able to get the entire list, which is pretty cool and really easy. So again, on the client side, I'm going to send a request for online users. When I get the response.data, I'm going to just add that into my connected users, and I'm going to update that. And on the server side, for the request, I'm going to send the sockets adapter rooms, and that's all I need to do. All right, so let's just comment this out so that I don't log too many things. Now the next thing is we need to also do the disconnect part, because we obviously need to send the same event back to all clients. Remember here we said tell all clients that someone connected. So let me copy this, and I'm going to do tell all clients that someone disconnected. That's also important. So and how do we do that? We're going to say here, and remember this again goes inside the disconnect event, right? So once someone disconnects, I need to tell, because obviously a specific socket disconnected, right? This socket. So I need to tell everybody else who's connected to the server. So for that, what you do is do socket.broadcast.emit. So new thing here. And you can do user left. Okay. And then socket.id. That's all you do here. And I'm doing a broadcast because I don't really need to tell you that you left. It doesn't make any sense. The tab is already closed, right? So I'm doing a broadcast. So remember, the broadcast essentially goes out to everybody else except you. So instead of a regular emit. And here I need to do socket.broadcast because this is, inside the socket.on loop or the block. So I did user left. So now, remember how we did the user join before? So if you do user left, you of course need to catch that on your client side. So in my client.js, I need to catch that, right? So maybe I can put that right below this piece of code here. So I'm gonna say if server emits or broadcast, really, whatever, user left event, right? Then remove that the leaving user from connected users array, right? That's what we're doing. Okay. So let's do that. So for that, we need to do again socket.on the same way. We're going to catch the event, which is user left, and then we do something inside the function. We know what socket ID is leaving, and so we do that here in this block. So now we just need to write some simple JavaScript. Basically, we're going to get the index of the user that's leaving from that array, right? So we're going to find that user in the array, because of course if it's leaving, that means it was already added to this array. So we're going to get that index, and of course we need to check if he actually, or he or she was in that array. So if index is greater than -1, so 0 or more, right, whatever you prefer. If you want to do greater than equal to 0, that's fine too. Then you do this dot connected users dot splice. So this is again a plain JavaScript, nothing fancy. Next one. So this line basically removes that socket ID from the array. So I get the index of the socket ID, and then I remove that. So when you do a splice on the connected users, it's going to take out that value at that index. So that should take care of that. All right. Okay. So let's save this. So we have done the server side disconnect. We're going to broadcast the user left with the socket ID of the user who left. And on the client side, I'm going to catch that and then do this. Okay. So let's restart the server. And now if I just reload this page here, let's just reload. Of course, I have 2 already in here. I'm getting an error. No. So that's 1 here. And then let's do another one. So as expected, we have 2 online, both are shown here, 2 online, both are shown here. So now let's say if I disconnect the second one, which is this guy, so I should still see the first one. So let's close the tab, and we hit an error. Can't read property index. Of undefined. Looks like it's one of those binding issues again. And it is. So remember, we have to do this. Okay. Never forget that. That's always a bit tricky. But okay, so I'm going to reload. So I've got 1 client. Let's connect. Got another client, and now if I close the second tab, which is this guy, I should only see the first one. Okay, updated. Pretty cool, right? All right, so that's what we're doing here. So let me close the console. So this is all in real time. So if I do like 3 of them, Control V, I got this again, and if I do Control V, a brand new tab, I see all the 3. Beautiful, isn't it? So this part is completely done now. Connection, disconnection, showing the online users, and really showing the list of the online users and the count. If I close the middle tab, then this is the middle one, so this guy should go away, and it does. Pretty cool. We close the first one, this guy should go away, so we should remain with this WP user, and it does. See, real time. Isn't that awesome? All right, so now we need to get into this right side of the screen, which is the actual chat. We haven't done that yet. But of course, now we have a pretty good idea of the socket.on. and the emit and the broadcast and all that stuff. So client sends something, a server sends something to the client can catch it. So far, that's the only thing we've done, that a server is sending something, we're catching it, right? But for the chat itself, we also need to do the part where we need to send something from the client to the server. So the beauty is that just like the server can do an emit, the client can do an emit as well. So that's what we're going to do next for writing the chat messages. So let's do that. Okay, so let's go into the methods. So remember we created a send function earlier? So now we're going to implement that from the client side. So when a send function will send the chat message, right? Okay, so we're going to do this dot message. Remember the data message that we defined earlier here with the type action, and I will explain what these are, of course. But now we're going to do for the chat itself, we're going to set this dot message dot type equals to chat. And you might ask why you're using this type property. It's always going to be chat, right? Not quite. What we're going to do here, notice that in this hard-coded example, we send a notification and we send the actual chat. So both are messages for, from our perspective. So we need to differentiate. That's why this first one, the user one has joined, is actually a type of information or info or notification, whatever you want to call it. And the second type is actually a chat. So for the send part, we're going to build that here. So the type will be chat. And of course, this dot message dot user. And now we know what the socket that is connected, the current socket on the client side. So we're just going to do socket.id. So easy, right? This dot message dot timestamp equals to, and I'm going to use a JavaScript library called moment.js for this. So it shows you like right now, how it shows here hard-coded today at 4. But for now, let's just hard-code it to today, right? We're going to change that later. That's not really important. And then I'm going to do socket.emit. So remember, now I'm emitting from the client side. So I'm actually sending something to the server. And we're sending a chat.message event. And again, this can be anything. I'm using a dot notation here just to say it's a chat and it's a chat message. So whatever you can put here, whatever you put here is what you will catch on the server side again. Same way. So, and then it's just going to be this dot message. And then once the client has sent it out, remember the message variable needs to clear. Otherwise, it's always going to have that value set. So we need to clear everything. So let's just do this dot message dot type equals to blank. And we could put this in a function like a reset function, but I'm just going to call it once anyway. So we're just going to do that. Oops. This dot message dot text equals to, okay, and then this dot message dot timestamp equals to, okay. So we reset everything and we send it. So that's all you need to do from the client side, send the message. Obviously on the server side, now let's catch it, right? So let's go back to our server side code and we're going to say on the index.js file, we're going to say, again, everything goes inside the io.on connection. So we will say something like the client sends chat.message event to server, right? So what we're going to do for that. So let's do that. So we're listening for that event called chat.message sent by the client, remember? Now that's why we're using the on function, not the emit, because now we are listening on the server side that, hey, client sent me something, which is this. And then of course I'm gonna catch the parameter function. That's the message that I got from the client. So all I need to do on the server side, think about it. What do I need to do when I receive a chat message from one client? Of course, I need to send it to other clients, right? So that means I'm going to do emit this event to all clients connected to it, right? So we're going to do io.emit chat.message, same event, we're going to also emit. So it's kind of like saying one client sends it, I catch it, but then I send it to other clients as well. So I'm going to do message, the data that was sent over. That's all you need to do on the server side. And we should be good to go. Cool. All right, so we got the chat.message from the client. We emit that from the client side. On the server side, we catch it, and we again emit it to all the other clients, right? Obviously. So now think about it. As a client, when I connected, I sent the chat. The server received it, server sent it to everybody else. But we need to do one more thing, right? Which is that I sent it because I'm the one who sent the chat. But what about the other clients? They need to catch something, right? That is this, catch that chat message event that the server is emitting, right? All the other clients. So that means on the client side, I also need to write some code to now catch this message or look for this if it comes from the server, right? Again, I'm emitting because I'm the one who sent the chat. But if I'm not the one sending the chat, I also need to catch that a chat.message event that's coming to me from the server, right? Okay, so we're going to do that next. So let's do that. So on my side, I need to do something like, again, just in the created part. So that's going to go back in the created function of the Vue instance, right? Everything is up and running. So I'm going to say, maybe we just put it before the user leaving. Doesn't really matter, but if server emits chat.message, update messages array. This is a beautiful part of Vue because remember I showed you the Vue already updates the data and it shows you in the browser. It's a two-way binding. So in this case, all we need to do is update the messages array, and as long as I'm reading that messages array in my HTML, which we haven't done yet, because remember the HTML is still hard coding the messages, but we're going to change that now. But as long as I'm updating the messages array and I'm reading it in my index HTML file, I'm good to go. So let's do that. So let's just update the messages array. So how do we do that? So if the server emits chat message, which means I need to listen for socket.on chat.message. And then same thing, I'm going to grab the message that the server sent. And I'm going to do this dot messages dot push message. That's all I'm doing. And remember to do the bind. Otherwise, same We've seen this issue twice now in this tutorial already. So, okay, so we do that, and that should be good to go. But obviously we need to update the HTML now because we're not really showing this here, right? So let's now do a little bit of update on the HTML side. So we're done with the online users, all good. But here in the messages, we're still kind of hard coding things. The user has joined versus the actual chat message. So we need to change this. Okay, so real cool again. When we are in this section, div class equals to
Everything checked.
No! Let's just go ahead and
panel body, chat ID messages. And here, instead of, we see if we have one li or list item that shows the info message, and then we have, you know, inside the li we have a div that says user join, and then we have an li that says div that is the actual chat message. So again, let's use the for loop, right? Because we're going to be looping over the messages array. So we're going to do li v4 equals to message in messages, right? And then here, the div class info, we only show that, remember we hard coded this, right? So right now, of course, it's going to show all the time, but we don't want to do that. We want to check if the message type is info, then show it, right? So for that, there's another awesome like directive called vif. So we're going to do vif equals to, remember we set a type on the message, so we're going to do message.type equals to info. Okay, and let's make sure we close that other one. Of course, the class info remains as is. So we say if the message type is info, then only show that, which is going to be just show me the message, which is going to be someone has joined. And I'm setting the actual message here. Okay. So I'm going to be passing in the message parameter, so property. So I'm going to say if message type is info, then send that over. Okay. So this basically all I'm saying is don't show this div unless the message type is info, and I just print the message. Pretty cool, right? So you don't really have to now worry about that message. You know, you don't have to worry about this issue anymore, that you need to actually hard code anything. I don't know. Yeah. Okay, so now the next div, same thing. We're gonna do this, all this stuff, the image, you know, the chat, actual chat. We only need to show this div if, right? Again, let's close that. So this time what it's gonna be? It's gonna be message.type equals to chat. Again, this is my way of implementing this. There's many ways to do this. How you actually construct your JavaScript and the data and the object is really up to you. This is what I'm using in this example. Of course, it may not be perfect, but it works. So, you know, of course, use your creativity and imagination to come up with your own data structures when you are building an application like this. Anyway, so if the message type is chat, then blah 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 blah. And now let's not hard code anything. So instead of user1, it's going to be message.user. Beautiful, right? And then instead of the actual message, hard coded message, we're going to just say message.text. Remember, that's what we said. Okay, so that's good. That's good. That takes care of everything. All right. So now we need to do one more thing. Of course, if we go back to my screen here, you know, the form that we built earlier is just a text box, but there's no logic to it, right? We need to submit this form so we can send the chat over, right? So the form submission needs to be done. So how do we do that? Again, in using Vue, it makes it very easy. Vue, just like the director, we also have this thing called on submit, or on form on submit. So we could just, there's a shortcut for that. So I'm going to say add submit. And there's another really cool thing in Vue, which if you do after that a dot prevent, so you're going to prevent the default propagation. Remember, you know, you don't want a default event which is to refresh the page when a form is submitted. So we're just going to do add submit dot prevent, which means submit the form, but suppress the default behavior, which is to refresh the form, right? So you know how there's a stop default propagation function general in JavaScript? That's what it essentially does. Okay, so we're going to do submit.prevent. This is very important. Equals to, and then we're going to actually call the send function, which we wrote earlier, right? So all I'm saying is when the form is submitted, suppress the default stuff that the form does, which means essentially refreshing the page and all that, and just call the send function. Isn't that awesome, right? But we need to do one more thing. The input right now by itself is just simple HTML. There's no, we're not telling Vue.js that there's a binding here. So we need to add that. So we need to say v model equals to, we need to give it a name. And the model is, remember, going to be message.text that we set earlier in the data. So now we're saying the message.text is what gets set here. We're going to display the chat message. And that's the reason I'm using a separate property for the info message, not the same as text, because I don't want to mess this up here in the input box. Okay, cool. All right, so this should take care of that. And then obviously we need to now, I think we're ready because we've done all the server and the client side. We have implemented the send function. We did the HTML. And notice how slowly we have converted our HTML into a completely dynamic. There's no more static hard coding anywhere. Isn't that beautiful? All right, so let's make sure. Oh, I messed one more thing here. in the today at 4 p.m. Let's just change that to message.timestamp. Obviously, that still is hard-coded. I didn't want to spend time on that for now. We're going to use a library called moment.js to show the actual timestamp, but for now, we don't need to hard-code in the HTML. So we're good with the HTML. Pretty good. All right. So if I understand this correctly, this should work. So I know I did a lot. So let me just close this server. Let's reboot and let's restart. All right. So let's send a chat here. Hi. Voila, and it works. So notice I sent a chat. Of course, I sent it to myself. There's no point here. So let's start a new tab. Okay, so I connected. Now notice that when I connected, I don't see the existing chat. And the reason is because I have not done that implementation. Just to save us some time, I'm not saving any chat messages on the server side. Like for example, that's happening is because if I go to my client JavaScript, I'm starting with a blank array. So essentially, I could have said in the created function when the vue.js loads again, I could have populated the existing messages somehow from the server. I'm not doing it in this tutorial, but if you ever build that, that's an extra step for you. So anyway, that's why it starts blank, so don't get worried. But let's try something here. So if I send chat, hey, I'm here too, if I sent this chat and I'm this user, it should have come up in the first tab, and it does. Woohoo! Isn't that awesome? The chat functionality is done. I mean, the basic chat functionality. We obviously have to do the typing and the stop typing, as I promised. We're going to cover that in the next video. But the chat function is done. Now let's try that. If we actually join, we should see the join notification, but we didn't see that actually on the second tab. When I open the second tab, we did not see that, right? Yep. So the join function and the is typing function, all that is going to be in the next video. This video is already too long. But that's it, guys. I mean, I think we've done a good job here with implementing the chat functionality, and now you can have any number of people connecting in real time and chatting with each other. Of course, we still have to fix a couple of things, like the timestamp I'm going to fix in the next video, and then we're just going to do the who's typing and stop typing and who's joined and who's left. So we're going to do all that stuff in the next video. So thank you for watching, and I hope you're learning something. Thank you.